You've tuned in to the most crazy rocking metal podcast on the air. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Metal from the Inside.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Metal from the Inside podcast. I'm your host, Sydney Taylor, and I'm joined by my friend Don Jamieson, who I have had on the podcast before. Way back when, I think, Don, you were like my second or third guest that I had on the podcast. So he's back, and this time we were doing a fun episode about some underrated bands. So thank you so much, Don, for coming back.
Well, thank you for coming back, because you took a little time off, and, you know, we gotta keep waving the flag for all our favorite bands. And I thought, man, we love to talk about the big bands and have the big guests on, I on my webcast as well. But, I was like, but we got to also remember the underdogs too. So I thought it'd be fun if we did most underrated metal bands, and particularly here in America. Because I know some of mine were bigger in other places in the world, but in America, kind of flew under the radar.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton of them. And I mean, it's funny because I was going through this and I was like, some of these, I know that people know of them, but I wish that I just wish that they could have gotten to, that legendary status. So I think this is going to be fun. I think we both got some good lists. So I'm going to have you go first. The guest always goes first. So Don, give me your fifth, top underrated bands.
I mean, listen, you can make a case for a lot of bands that people go, what? How are they underrated? Like Cheap Trick, who's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You could actually make the case that they're an underrated band because, again, in America, they're, I Want You to Want Me and Surrender, pretty much, So,
that's it.
but listen, they're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, so I didn't pick them, and I think pretty much everybody on Earth knows who Cheap Trick is, but I wish they knew more of their catalog because the stuff is so great. But no, we're going back now to the new wave of British heavy metal, one of the original bands, that came out of that era, and that is Raven. And I got a little breakup here, but that's their album Stay Hard. It's the first album that I ever got from the band Raven. This one, for whatever reason, was not a popular one with their fans. I think because they got signed to Atlantic, and I think they made them a little slicker, try to give them a little polish or whatever, Yeah. And us metal fans, like we like our bands to be a little rough around the edges. So, but because I always loved these guys, I thought this was a great album. I thought it would really. I mean, this came out in 85. So, I really thought this one would really catapult them. They had a cool image. They had a drummer. See if I can. There we go. A drummer that wore a hockey mask, a goalie's mask on stage. And but the Gallagher brothers, John and Mark, they've been doing this band for going on almost 50 years, I think. So they just never broke here in America for whatever reason. They've had their moments. And they're still putting out albums. They put out an album last year called Metal City. That was great. So, for me, what are the reasons? Well, probably 95% of their fan base is male. So it's, if you can bring the girls to rock and roll, obviously you could double your audience instantly. But they're definitely a male-dominated band. But they've released great albums over the years, and like I said, they still are. So, unfortunately, they when bands like Metallica, and Iron Maiden, who were new wave of British heavy metal people, went to great heights. Raven just sort of flatlined here, but it's a great band.
Yeah, they are great. And again, one of those that you talk about the big thrash bands, and they never, or like the big just heavy bands, they never make it into that list. So I didn't even think of them, but that's a great choice.
Yeah, and Metallica, look, bands like Metallica will always give credit where credit's due.
Right.
They talk about how Saxon, was Princess of the Night and that kind of stuff was really part of the original thrash movement. Because nobody was really playing that fast, and Raven as well. So they get the accolades from their peers, but yeah, the fans just never really caught on with them.
Yeah, I completely agree. So my number 5 is a band that I kind of tossed around as saying underrated, but I've decided that I think that they're underrated, and for the sole reason that I think that they deserved a lot more than they got, and that they never really reached that level of that they deserved. So my number 5 is going to be one of my favorite bands of all time, and I'm going to say Dokken. And I'm going to say Dokken because they were always, and like another band I have on my list, a lot of people who love this type of music know obviously who Dokken is. Like it's they're a name that people are familiar with, but they never quite got to headlining tours. They were always the opener. They were always opening up for Aerosmith and Twisted Sister, and I don't know, God knows, I think like they opened up for like Rainbow in '84. They were always the opener, and they never quite made it to headlining shows. And by the time that they were even kind of possibly getting to that point, they split up. So, they never quite made it. And I personally always felt that they should have been on a level of, if you want to say like what the big bands at that time, like a Def Leppard or a Motley Crue, or, all those bands that nowadays, if you say Motley Crue or Def Leppard, even, people around my age group are familiar with the name, but you say Dokken, and I'm like, one of my favorite bands, is Dokken, and people my age are like, who? What's a Dokken? That's what people say to me. They're like, what's a Dokken?
Dokken, oh no. But they'll know rockin' with Dokken. That they'll know, but they don't understand the Dokken part of it. They know it rhymes, but then you go, do you know who Dokken is? And they're like, no.
No, and they never got to that level. And I mean, you had George Lynch, one of the most talented guitarists that in that era. And I don't know. I mean, they obviously had some of the hits, In My Dreams, and, obviously Dream Warriors eventually. And, but
they never had the big giant hit. That was the problem. You're right. They had a lot of hits that within the genre, but and then the movie soundtrack song definitely opened them up to more people, but they just never had, they never had that 18 in life to go, type of song.
No, yeah, they never had it, and I will forever die on that hill of them having been bigger. And it's one of those things where, I don't know why they didn't. I don't even have really any reason. I was a guest on one of my friends' podcasts, The Hook Rocks. I don't know if you ever heard of them. But we had a whole episode where we talked about why Dokken shouldn't have been bigger. I'm like, I don't even have a reason why they didn't get to that point. Whether it was just the tension in the band or I don't know, whatever, but I'll always die on that hill that they should have been bigger than they were.
Right. Well, listen, for them, the tension, tension in a band is always a good thing creatively, but their problem was it was too much. It really was, the implosion of the band, because George and Don, were like oil and water. So, but their tension was too much, So, it was funny when we had them on that metal show, George and Don, after them, not talking forever, and they were gonna announce that they were reuniting again to do shows. And, Don went on this whole thing, we never really had that much tension. It was the record company trying to just stir something up so people would pay attention to us. And then they spent the entire program arguing with each other. And then they literally decided not to announce a reunion, because by the end of the show they hated each other again, and that was it. So it's tough. You have to have the right amount of tension.
Yeah, and I mean, they're doing some shows now together, which I wonder, I don't know if it's just age or getting older or realizing that if they don't do it now, they might never do it. All right, so what is your number 4?
All right, so this band, not only are they way underrated. There it is. Riot, Fire Down Under, one of the greatest hard rock albums ever. Wow, what a story. Riot has such a crazy story. There's actually still a version of Riot that tours around called Riot 5, because I guess they consider it sort of the 5th version of this band. But this original version with Guy Speranza on lead vocals, who had such a clean, distinctive, unique, beautiful voice, very powerful for hard rock. Just as they're starting to break, he goes, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be a singer. I'm going to go back to being an exterminator, which is literally what he did. And that's, that was really the first downfall for this band, I mean, because they were around since the early 80s. They were at the first Castle Donington in England, which is really where they broke originally. DJ over there named Neil Kay used to play them on his radio show, and so they kind of got popular, which is a story with, you know, Twisted Sister and a lot of other American bands, is like they catch on, and Guns even catch on in England first, and then they come back here and take it to the next level. Riot never took it to the next level. Guy Speranza leaves the band. They bring in another singer who's phenomenal, Rhett Forrester, but Rhett's got a totally different voice, very bluesy and soulful. So the band, you know, so it almost became a different band. Then after Rhett left, and then both guys subsequently died after they left, both singers. Then they went to more of a thrash kind of sound, like in the early 90s. But so look, you know, they were their own worst enemy too. I mean, you know, they had the songs, they sort of had the look and the image, and nobody likes the nobody likes the Mighty Tior as much as I do. The one thing they kept was the mascot. Everybody, you know, so many people in and out of this band. It's, you know, look, we all know members and bands get replaced, but it can't be like every 2 weeks, you know, because eventually you're just like, all right, I don't know what the identity of this band is anymore. And are they a bluesy, soulful band? Are they a thrash band? Are they a hard rock band from New York? They're all that, but unfortunately it just was never a cohesive thing. But you know, if you're watching this podcast or listening to this and you don't have this album Fire Down Under, for shame on you.
Yeah, for shame. Even though it's probably hands down, if anybody asked me what is the worst album cover you think you've ever seen, I might say Fire Down Under. I remember seeing that for the first time and I was like, what is going on here? Like, why is there a seal on here? And but yeah, the mascot kept. I mean, you look at all the other, you know, following records and he's there, man.
I like it because I really never put much thought into it. So right. It was just always there. Until we actually discussed it on that metal show once, and I didn't realize how many people didn't like the Mighty Tior, which the mascot actually has a name. But it's funny what catches on with people or what doesn't. You know, I had Rick Nielsen on my webcast, and I asked him about the checkerboard. You know, and he sort of, you know, he was like, I don't know why it caught on. It, you know, is just something that we started using and it caught on. And I was like, yeah, it's strange. You never sort of know what's going to catch on with people.
My number 4 is another band kind of from the same era that I spoke about before. But again, I don't think ever really received the recognition that they deserved. And I'm going to go with Tesla. I love Tesla so much. And again, another one of those bands that just never quite broke, I feel like, huge. They were always the opener. They were always, you know, kind of following in the footsteps of a Def Leppard, but again, never made it to be Def Leppard. They were always opening up for Def Leppard and never made it to that level. And I think partially they just weren't super image focused. You know, they were just guys that came out, they were dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. And, you know, Jeff Keith had a little bit of that, you know, flashy, a little bit of that stuff in the beginning. But other than that, I mean, they were just kind of a bluesier band. And I guess at that time, you know, the Great Radio Controversy came out in '89. And that was at that point where a lot of those bands were just getting it was just super saturated and it was really image heavy. And eventually, I mean, we can kind of see how that went and why those bands didn't last for that long because it was getting just super saturated. But yeah, they just really weren't fitting the mold. And I just don't think that they got a ton of press. I talked to Brian Wheat. He was on my podcast when his book was coming out. And he kind of said the same thing. They didn't really get any press and it just led to them not being super big, but they're one of my all-time favorite bands. I mean, the Great Radio Controversy ranks as one of my favorite albums of all time. It's just a shame. I think that they should have been a lot bigger than they were.
Yeah, you know, you're spot on. I mean, it really was. They didn't know what category to put them in. Even nowadays, it's like if you listen to the rock stations on Sirius XM, they kind of default them to the Hair Nation channel for whatever reason, but they don't really belong there. But, you know, listen, you know, they could have had a career like Aerosmith. You know, what category did Aerosmith fit into? But, you know, Aerosmith was born out of the 70s and Tesla was born out of the 80s. They had their huge moments on MTV. My God, I mean, Love Song was played every 10 minutes. So, but yeah, you're right. They were just a jeans and t-shirt band, and it just I don't know. Again, it's I don't know why bands have to fit into a certain category. You know, it's befuddling to me. But again, hey, listen, a band that's still going. It's still pretty much the original band, except for one member. So, God bless, we still got them.
Well, that's what I was gonna say too. Is that you look at now all these kind of like festivals that cater to that type of music. You go to the Monsters Rock Cruise every year, and they're doing the Monsters on the Mountain thing. And I mean, Tesla, like M3, they're pretty consistently booked when it comes to like that period. So they're definitely recognized, but it's just they never even when they were big, they play a lot of these like smaller theaters now when they're doing headlining shows, and it wasn't that much different, when they were at their peak either. They're still touring with Def Leppard. I mean, I don't know. I always, again, similar to Dokken, always die on that hill that they should have been a lot bigger. So
Definitely.
tough.
All right, my number 3 is the band Angel.
Yes.
Everybody, right now, everybody's going, whoa, what?
With one of the
Angel.
coolest logos ever.
Right. Well, yeah, it's the same right side up as it is upside down, which a fan actually drew and sent it to them, and that's how they got the Angel logo. But look, you can see the white outfits. If I could get it, the Angel was the anti-Kiss.
Yeah.
They were, Gene Simmons sort of discovered them, brought them into Casablanca Records, to Neil Bogart and all those guys. And that's how they positioned them. Kiss, back in the day, they were the dark, they wore all black leather. They were the dark forces, Gene being the demon. Angel was supposed to be the antithesis of that. The white outfits, the whole heavenly thing, live in concert, they would come out. They would each, there was an announcement. Actually, it was the first time a hologram was really ever used at a rock show. Now we see, Ronnie Dio has a hologram and Frank Zappa has a hologram, but they used to have a hologram of God, and he would tell the whole story of how these 5 angels come together on earth to bring the music from heaven to the people on earth. And as he introduced each one, a pod would light up, and they'd be inside the pod, and the door would open, and they would step out, and it was a whole thing. But there's really no footage of that because this is firmly a 70s band, and they really didn't, videotape a lot back then like we do now. There was no cell phones, there was no YouTube or any of that stuff. And Angel started out really as a progressive rock band, but then they got fine-tuned to write more, 3.5 minute, more, poppy rock songs. So they were still heavy, but instead of writing 6 and 7 minute songs, they were writing 3.5 minute songs for radio. Just never caught on for whatever reason. Talented dudes, Greg Giuffria went on to do House of Lords and his own band Giuffria, and now is a multi-billionaire for inventing a chip that plays the music in the slot machines in casinos. So, Frank Domino, the singer, still puts out records and does shows. Punky Meadows, the original guitar player, same thing. Yeah. He's still kicking around and doing stuff. So, but I don't think you're going to drag Greg away from his billions of dollars to play, a small club in Jersey or Pennsylvania. It's just not, the fan base just isn't there for these guys. But I always loved them.
Yeah, they were a great band. I have that record too behind me somewhere. I think Martin Popoff did a whole like biography book about them, recently. And yeah, they're just one of those bands that a lot of people don't really. I've never heard one person that's outside of, I don't know, liking this music been like, have you ever heard of Angel? It just doesn't happen.
The other thing with them, if they either started later and ended later, or was able to make it into even the early part of the 80s,
right.
I really think they would have capitalized on the whole MTV thing because they had such an image, but people didn't really see it. You saw it on the album covers and the photographs inside, but if they would have been a great video band. I think they would have really blown up if they could have taken advantage of the MTV generation, but it was not to be.
Yeah. And if it's another album, if you're listening, if you've never listened to White Hot or any of those records, get on it because you're missing out. So my number 3 is actually going to be a band that's a newer band. And it's a band that they've been out for a couple years now, and they still have not managed to reach really a big US or American audience. And that's the band Lucifer, which I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with Lucifer.
Yeah.
Great band from Sweden. I had Johanna Adonis on the podcast way back when too. And she's great and great vocalist, female vocalist. And they're just they've not caught on here, and they're very like a Black Sabbath, like doomy type of band. A lot of influence from kind of that classic era, which I feel like we're seeing a lot, that's having a big comeback. A lot of bands, especially, overseas and everything. But they've been around for, I don't know, I think well over 5 years now. And they came to Philly like 2 years ago, and they played one of the smallest clubs that I think I've ever seen a band play, like Kung Fu Necktie. And I was like, man, I just feel like they deserve to so much bigger. Like they're way big in like Sweden and Germany, and they play festivals and all these big things, and they just haven't managed to break it over here. And I hope that they prove me wrong and that one day it happens, but it's just, I feel like a hard market. We talked about it. I'm on the show weekly, and we had a whole conversation about it, about maybe part of it's their name, which is completely fair, but I'm like, man, come on, guys. Like, we're still really on this satanic panic thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. But
I don't, yeah. Well, listen, I'm, with music, I'm always 16 years old. So, when I first heard there was a band called Lucifer, obviously the first thing I did was had to check them out.
Right.
I think that kind of music, Sid, is, they kind of have a limited audience, really, and so that's probably part of the problem. Obviously, what sets them apart from the 80 billion other bands that sound like Black Sabbath is having, the female vocalist in the band. They have a cool image and everything. I think they just have to write some stuff that's a little more accessible. It's, obviously you're not going to get really any radio airplay, but some of these bands, even, Jose Mangin on Liquid Metal is great with trying to, give a boost to a lot of these, newer bands or bands that, he feels are underrated, and gives them a bit of a platform, and that helps. But to come over here from Sweden to play Kung Fu Necktie for 13 people, it's like, how much money am I going to lose going to America to try to break this band? You don't have a record company. Record companies don't pay for tour support anymore, or any of that stuff, or very few anyway. So it's really all on the band to do everything themselves, and it's tough. Social media only does so much, but they're a good band. So hopefully they will prove you wrong, and you'll be able to erase them from the list.
I hope so. I mean, and you're kind of right. I don't think that they've had a super, you look at a lot of these bands, like I'm thinking of like a Hailstorm or like an Evanescence, where they have like these, female vocalists, and they're pretty big here, and they play, they'll play festivals and stadiums and everything. I think just Lucifer, it's just not that type of band where they have a lot of like melodic hits that people are going to be like super stoked about. I mean, they have some, I personally love their albums. I think they have some great songs, but I don't think it's right now they have the songs that are kind of gonna reach that type of audience. But hopefully they'll, I don't want them to sell out either. That's the thing, is like they're so great. I don't want them to turn into something that they're not, to get a so.
Yeah, and there's, it's, again, they're a young band, so they still have time. Obviously, most of the ones that we're talking about, their time has kind of passed. But there's so many other ways too to capitalize and get success. I mean, there's bands that are like have huge followings because they were in a video game, or something like that. So there's that whole avenue, which has also been good for old artists. I mean, to hear my back when she was 5 years old, my niece walking around the house 5 years old singing Alice Cooper School's Out is like, how would you ever know that? And it's like, oh, he's on Guitar Hero, and we play that all the time. So there's other ways to kind of get your foot in the door with fans. So we'll see what happens with them. So this guy's been in the game a really long time, but he won't come tour in America because or very rarely, I should say, but he hasn't done it in a long time because, again, there's no money.
Yeah.
And it sucks because he's a legend. Michael Monroe.
Absolutely.
There's the newest album right there, One Man Gang. And I'm sure he feels like that. What more can the guy do? Hanoi Rocks, his original, the band that brought him notoriety in the beginning. That, God, I mean, you talk about these bands going to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and their influence. It's like Michael Monroe and Hanoi Rocks was such an influence on so many of, especially the Sunset Strip bands. I mean, look no further than Guns N' Roses. Axl will tell you, he, without Hanoi Rocks, man, there would be no Guns N' Roses. So, Michael's been making solo albums with his solo band, which is beyond ridiculously good, for years now, decades now. And, he's a phenomenal performer, but, like I said, they can't come here and play. He's from, he lives in Finland. He's not coming from Finland to lose, 50 grand.
No.
Or 100 grand. You can't do it. So, in the meantime, if people don't know Michael's stuff, I mean, this is just, it's as good straight up hard rock and roll as you're ever going to hear.
I've never even had the opportunity because he just doesn't come here. I'm like, and it's also hard to go to, on our end, go to Finland and Germany and all these places to see him play. It's like, I don't know. I hope if he does a final something, maybe he'll come here and do some shows or something kind of as a farewell, but he's great, man. That's a good show.
He's the only guy that can get away with playing a saxophone in a hard rock band.
Yeah, he's fantastic, and those new records are great. And the fact, I mean, how old is he now? He's got to be in his late 60s, mid to late.
No, you know what? He had a birthday recently. I was actually surprised, and maybe I saw it wrong, but we could obviously. I'm sure we can Google it and find out. I swear, I thought it said happy 58th birthday, but that can't be possible.
No, I don't. I mean, I think he might be a little bit older than that. But I guess
it's got to be in his 60s.
He's been around forever. He's been doing so much stuff for so many years, but I mean, he's still out there. He still looks good. He's still killing it.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, and he's just got such a great voice. And the thing I love really the most about Michael Monroe and his band, because Steve Conti is a genius on guitar. There's never a wasted note. Everything is so freaking tasty and good and not obvious. I love that. And Sammy Yaffa on bass, guys. Every time I see him, I go, Sammy, you're a genius. You know that? He really is. And he puts together this band that focuses on songwriting. Like, you can listen, this is, like Lucifer is a band you got to kind of get into that headspace with. This is like, by the second chorus of any Michael Monroe song, you're already singing it because they're so identifiable. And, it's got that punk rock sort of vibe to it, but yet it's, the music is sort of a throwback to the, just, good rock and roll, simple beats, simple riff and all that, but it's just what everybody brings into it and the great songwriting that makes it so cool. Like any song that they do about New York City, you feel like you're walking around New York at that time and place and hit. Like they have a song called The Ballad of the Lower East Side. I live down in that neighborhood, and the way they sing it, I'm like, I can picture myself walking through Tompkins Square Park and all these places. So it's just such there's such a visual element to the lyrics and again the kind of the punk rock ethos of all of it. So go out and buy Michael Monroe.
My number 2 is going to be a band that I saw at M3, I think 2 years ago, and they blew me away. And I had known their stuff before then, but I kind of really went back and dove into it a little bit more. And that's the band Vane. I love Vane, and they went so underneath the radar. That first record, No Respect, is one of the best records, I feel like, of that entire time period. But with Vane, and why I think that they never really got huge was, again, the first record came out in 89, so similar to Tesla. By the time they kind of hit big time, things were already kind of sizzling out a little bit. But also they started out in the Bay Area, which is, was known mostly for the thrash scene, and they were not thrash. They didn't go to LA. they were in Island Records, and they were in the Bay Area, and then they went to New York, and then they went back to the Bay Area, and they just never really hit huge. They had a couple albums, obviously, after No Respect. And man, I saw them, like I said, at M3, I think, back in 2019, and Davey Vane still sounds as good as he did on that record live, and I'm pretty sure it's close to a lot of the original members. I think it might be off one or two of the original members, but you know, Davey's still there, Delana is on guitar, and I don't know, I think that they just went so underneath the radar. They become one of my favorite, you know, bands from that time period, and more people should know about them, because I see when people post about them, a lot of people say that they've never even heard of them, which, you know, it's a shame. So if you haven't listened to Vane, I definitely highly recommend that you go listen to No Respect, because it's freaking amazing.
It's a great one. I missed the boat on Vane completely. So, you know, I'm a victim of that. And why? I don't know. I have no idea why I missed the boat on those guys. Speaking of boats, I actually got to see them on the Monsters of Rock cruise.
Right.
And I was like, wow, like, I can't believe these guys just completely slipped under the radar for me. But they still have a kind of a cult. It's sort of, there's a little movement afoot with these guys, but yeah, they just never got there, and I feel bad that I missed the boat on them. But yeah, great rock and roll, sort of like Michael Monroe. It's just great hard rock, straight up, loud freaking guitars, great vocals, great songs. So yeah, Vane's a good one.
Yeah, and again, they were kind of, I feel like, for the people who did know them, they were categorized into that kind of glam metal, like hair metal type, you know, genre. But yeah, like Tesla, you know, I don't think that they were even really, their music could even kind of be constituted to being, you know, at that time everyone, you know, assumed those kinds of bands were being cheesy or whatever. And I don't know, I mean, they had a little bit of an image thing when they first started. They had a lot of like the big hair or whatever, but I don't know, I think it's kind of a good mix between just classic kind of hard rock, and even some of it has a little bit of like that. There's some songs on that record that have a little bit of like punk feeling to them.
Yeah, it's weird. Them and Jet Boy, you know, didn't really fit in. You're right, they didn't fit into that Bay Area scene really. So maybe, you know, that could be, you know, that you know, your geography also can be a part of it. Like, had Metallica never gone to the Bay Area, would they have become Metallica? If they had stayed in Los Angeles, would they have ever really become, you know, the number one big four of thrash? Or would they ever have become as big as they are? Well, you know, I suppose they would have, but had they not made that move was really critical. And they only stayed in the Bay Area for like a year. Yeah. But it was just enough to really get that street cred and position them to where now they could go to the next level. So who knows, maybe if Vane and Jet Boy went to LA, they would have rode the wave of all those other bands that were getting big at the time. We'll never know. Well, there's always a reason or multiple reasons, and sometimes, you know what, I hate to say it, sometimes it's just, that's rock and roll.
Yeah.
Sometimes the breaks just don't happen, but it doesn't mean you're not great. You can probably imagine what my number one's going to be.
Yeah.
Of course, it's going to be the Genius, Phil Lynott, and Thin Lizzy, their classic double live album, Live and Dangerous. Yeah, in America, it's The Boys Are Back in Town and maybe Jailbreak. That's all anybody knows of Thin Lizzy. You know, listen, I always encourage people, it's never too late to jump on the bandwagon and get into them. To me, they are a band. You know, sometimes bands, if you didn't get into them then, it's hard to get into them now. You know, sometimes it's hard to go back and try to get into a band because the moment's kind of past. Thin Lizzy's a band like anybody could go back and really be seduced by Phil's singing and his lyrics. It's, you know, he was a poet, you know. You know, great bass player, which was obviously overshadowed by his, you know, he's the smoothest voice in rock and roll ever. And obviously there was so much more than Boys Are Back in Town. While it's a great song, but, you know, we've heard it 80 billion times, and I probably wouldn't even put it in their top 20 best songs.
No.
But that song is a good example. Again, what I was talking about with like Michael Monroe, which is, when you're listening to that song and the lyrics to that song, you feel like you're down at Dino's Bar and Grill, and you're seeing the whole scene unfold as he's singing it. That's the power of Phil's lyrics and the music that they made. Listen, a band with tons of tension in it at all times. And part of that was their downfall. Brian Robertson, obviously brilliant guitar player, but he was a tortured guy. He and Phil always butt heads, and then they were their own worst enemy in a lot of ways. When they were supposed to come and headline in America, Phil got hepatitis because he, unfortunately, he was pretty deep in his addiction by then, and his body just couldn't fight against anything. They had to cancel a headlining tour. Brian Robertson got in a bar fight and cut his hand open on a broken bottle. That delayed recording an album. They threw him out of the band. Gary Moore comes in. Gary and Phil love each other, but they butt heads, and then, some of the later albums did start to lose a bit of the quality of the earlier stuff. But man, I got Florentine into them like maybe 10 years ago. So it's never too late to jump on the Thin Lizzy bandwagon.
Yeah, they're really just so much more than that, than Jailbreak. That, that whole album is probably the most notable, here and from people. But it's really funny because I do this. Yeah, I was saying I do the show every week on Sea of Tranquility, which a lot of the people who watch this have come over to my stuff from there. But one of our panelists, his name's Butch Jones, and like Thin Lizzy's his favorite band of all time. And I've actually kind of gotten a little bit deeper into them. Like I'd known their stuff past, Jailbreak and everything, but I've kind of gotten into some of the more obscure albums because of him, and it's killer. I don't know how people haven't.
Oh, and listen, Butch rivals me, as far as his knowledge and his passion for this band.
Yeah.
Obviously I took it a step further, literally becoming friends with Phil's mom, and going to Dublin every year to visit with her, and go to Phil's grave and pay tribute, and to his, there's a statue of him in Dublin. And so while Thin Lizzy was much bigger on the other side of the pond, here it just wasn't there. I'm happy to see him nominated for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'm sure they probably will never get in, but at least it's good. At least they're in the conversation. So that makes me happy. But just great influential band. Just criminal that they never really broke. And if I was Eddie Trunk, instead of Thin Lizzy being my number one, it would probably be UFO. Because that's Eddie's. And this is my UFO, for Eddie is Thin Lizzy, and it was funny because Eddie got me back into UFO, and I got Eddie back into Thin Lizzy. Like, we always liked both those bands, but when you have a passion for a band, it really rubs off on people,
Yeah.
And and I hadn't listened to UFO in forever, and just Eddie just has such the passion. I go, I gotta get back and listen to them again, and he did the same thing with Thin Lizzy. So that's my number one.
It's funny that you should say what you just said, because my number one is UFO. And I was debating this, and I was like, I had always known that UFO had been just a huge influence to a lot of bands, and I guess it really hit me when I saw the documentary Murder in the Front Row, and pretty much every thrash band and anybody mentioned that documentary cited UFO as probably one of the biggest influences. And they don't get any credit at all, in my opinion. I mean, like, Strangers in the Night is probably my favorite live album of all time. And I got a UFO because of my dad. He would play, Phenomenon all the time and Strangers in the Night all the time. And I started to really love UFO and, Michael Schenker. And so I love UFO, and they don't get the credit that they deserved, I feel like, for being such an influence to a lot of the bands in America. And I don't know, like, just Metallica, Megadeth, Exodus, Testament.
Steve Harris from Iron Maiden.
Yeah.
Wears the striped spandex pants because of Pete Way from UFO.
Right. And they influenced an entire, just an entire movement. And it's funny because, you look at UFO, when you listen to UFO, they're not a band that I guess you would think if you are, I guess, super knowledgeable, would have influenced such a heavy band as a Megadeth or a Metallica. But, at that time when they were putting that stuff out, that stuff was super heavy. And, it's because bands like Metallica and Megadeth didn't exist yet. So, they were kind of the catalyst for all those bands. And, yeah, I don't know. I don't think that they ever got the credit that they deserved, or, like Pete Way passed away. And aside from, people like us who know about Pete Way, it wasn't like this big, when David Bowie died or something, or, it wasn't this huge thing. So just the innovation that those guys had, I feel like they deserved so much more than they got. So yeah, I love UFO.
Yeah, I think there's and Thin Lizzy and UFO are sort of in the same boat. Again, their own worst enemies sometimes, lineup changes, bad roll of the dice here or there. But Phil Mogg, their singer, and Phil Lynott from Thin Lizzy, both mad geniuses. I mean, Phil Mogg's lyrics are very underrated too. Again, another band that, man, he invokes such a visual element when you're listening to the music, and listen, anybody, it's solid songwriting, and no matter how heavy a band you are, you can always appreciate great songs and great songwriting, which is, kind of a lost art these days. But UFO is a good one.
This was fun. It was like we had our own little like that metal show moment.
Yeah.
Well, from the inside. And when you brought up this idea, I was like, man, it's like I wish I could get one of the boards, with the Velcro to do the.
Yeah, we should have Jennifer. We should have Jennifer come on with us and do the board. But you're like me, which is always to pay homage to the bands from the past, because they're the ones that have influenced the new ones that you and I are still discovering these days, because there really are so many of them. But also to root for the underdog and fight for them, and just the more you can talk. I did one whole season of that metal show where I just talked about Angel, and that really kind of rekindled interest for Frank Domino and Punky Meadows to start making music again. So it's like, the more we could get these names out there and remind people about them, it helps keep them alive. And then obviously, again, discovering new bands and trying to get the word out on those. You do a great job at that. I always try to do that on my webcast. I just hit 100 episodes a couple weeks ago, which I'm really proud of. And then we'll see what the future of that metal show is. You never know. What comes around goes around, as Stephen Piercy just said.
You should go ahead and text Eddie and ask him,
Yeah.
Have you tried Netflix?
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a while since we've tortured him on social media, so it might be time to fire that up again.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, it's funny. I completely kind of what you said. I had somebody, I talked about Tesla a lot on Sea Tranquility. I talk about them like all the time. And I've had a couple people email me and ask me, what like album recommendations, I should give them from Tesla. And they've gotten back to me and they said that they've loved them. And I'm like, man, if I could get one person to listen to those albums and just know who they are, it's a success in my book. It's the reason I do this. I feel like a lot of, the reason that either one of us do this. So.
Well said, Sid.
Yeah. Well, I know that you kind of been having shows pop up. You're starting to do comedy shows again and all that stuff. So do you have any shows coming up? Because I know you mostly do them in the tri-state area, PA, New York, New Jersey and stuff. But what have you got coming up soon?
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff, and people follow me on my social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I'm on all those. Don Jamieson, Jamieson. I'm going to go down to, I'm not performing. I'm not there in any official capacity, but I am going to go down to M3 this year on Friday and Saturday and just go and hang and rock out with Jim and Eddie and have a good time. So, but yeah, if you see me doing stand-up in your town, come on out. I'll definitely be a good amount of rock and roll jokes in there, as always. And it's always a good time. It's good to be on stage performing again. And it's especially great to see bands back on stage performing again. That ripped my heart out, and yours as well, for all this time we've been locked down. So good. Go out and support everyone you can. Anyone that you can afford to go out and see, go see them. And it really is therapy to be back working again.
Yeah, I see my first show back is I'm seeing Guns N' Roses on July 31st. And it's going to be weird going into a stadium and actually seeing a show. Like, I might cry. I might cry a little bit. I might cry a little bit. And then also, it's new episodes of That Jamieson Show every Tuesday, right? It's every Tuesday?
Yeah, compoundmedia.com. Like I said, just did my 100th show, which, it's my little placeholder until that metal show makes its triumphant return someday. It's like the Tony Iommi years of Black Sabbath when he had like 15 different singers in there. And then eventually, he was waiting for Ronnie or Ozzy to come back, and then they both eventually did. So
it's your
you never
star,
know.
Yeah.
But as much as you, I loved to just getting into it with these musicians and talking about all this great music that we love. And, there's still such a passion for it after all these years. So, that's where you can find me on there as well.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, Don, again, for coming on. It's always a pleasure to have you. And next time I'll get you on and we can talk a little bit about Alice Cooper. So
you never have to twist my arm for that.
Awesome, guys. Thanks so much for checking out another episode of Metal from the Inside. We'll be back next Friday with a brand new episode. And be sure to stay up to date with us on all of our social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that fun stuff. And we will see you next time. Thanks for watching.